What's up, family? Welcome back to Nazranis in the City. I'm Josh Abraham.
And I'm Abi Abraham.
And here we are one more time. Abi, where are we, man?
We're in NorCal.
And how did that happen?
That's one crazy story, man. So basically, we were trying to figure out how we can get consistent episodes down.
Yeah.
Since you live in SoCal, I live in NorCal. And especially during COVID, it's a little tough to go back and forth since, all the logistical issues. So we were planning on doing like Zoom call recordings.
And it wasn't bad. It could work. Yeah.
Right. And hopefully, we might have to do that down the line. But we wanted to do the best quality sessions possible as we can.
Right.
So it actually, man, what a crazy story. So once we decided that we wanted to do the in-person recordings, especially for the next couple episodes, we were trying to figure out, okay, if you guys came down to NorCal right now, since I wasn't able to come to SoCal again, like where would you guys stay? Where would we record and all of these things? So first I thought about my house, but unfortunately my house is like packed and my brother works at the hospital and stuff, so we just didn't think that was a good idea. Then we asked other uncles and stuff, and that, not because they didn't want us to stay there, but because of COVID and stuff, they weren't too comfortable, with their families being there and everything. Completely understandable.
Totally respect that.
So Sonny uncle, one of the uncles I reached out to, he said, okay, sorry, I can't have you stay in my house, but I actually know an uncle that's moving out. So Jimmy uncle, another uncle from my parish, he is moving out and he's moving away from this current house. And Sonny uncle was like, why don't you ask him if you can stay in until his tenant moves in? And we're here. Like it's crazy. We get like a full empty house to ourselves, beautiful home. We're able to both stay here and do all our recordings with complete freedom and in a prudent way where we're not putting others at risk.
That's
so right. I think that the way it worked out is just crazy because I wasn't looking for this house or anything like that. But
Just like, I mean, really, like, I was telling Jimmy uncle today, like, I really have this conviction that God moves through people. So, like Jimmy uncle, really we want to thank you for
absolutely
your generosity. And I know, I mean, just our kind of litany of thank yous right now. Siraj Sajid, thank you for your friendship. He's right here.
Yeah.
But just it's been a blast, driving up with you. It's been a blast having you in this friendship. Shout outs to Zhao Chaco Studios. That's a formal thing, but really, like, shout outs to Sean Chaco. He is the man behind all the tech, all the video, everything that you see and hear. It's because of Sean Chaco's work. And then I want to throw this in. Thank you to Amma and Chacha for letting me come up here. I know that's a big move on your part. I know It took a little bit of convincing, but thank you for believing in this calling.
Yeah. Same to my parents. I mean, this is it's a time like this. I understand if you don't want to let your kids go out and do things, but
right.
We're trusting that we're responsible enough to be safe, and also they know that this isn't just for fun. So
yeah, and like this, like we were just praying about this too, but like it's not our work, right? Just to kind of copy Mother Teresa here, like it's the Lord's work. We really do believe that, and I think as our final thank you, we want to thank you, the listener. Like really, like this was a very simple thing on Abi and I's part. We just kind of threw it out there, and we have received like so much.
Yeah,
it's almost overwhelming. Just like so much affirmation, so much encouragement and support. And it helps us believe that, this isn't just us. This isn't just a quarantine project. This is something that the Lord is willing us.
Yeah, because we didn't really know what to expect. And we always had that one line of like, even if just one person benefits from it, it's worth it. But it seems like, a bunch of people have reached out to us with like concrete ways that it's helped them and concrete things they appreciate about the podcast. And that truly does help us know like where to stay on the line that we need to stay on and where we, maybe can expand and stuff like that. So please continue to do so. Not the praise, although that's much appreciated, but really just letting us know like what touched you, what do you want us to talk about, and things like that.
How you can do that? We have a Instagram page. By the time this episode drops, we will have that'll be up. So if you just wanted to, if you had a question for Ubby and myself, or if you
Yeah.
had a comment or anything like that.
If you don't have Instagram, we also have the email, which is
That's right. The email is nazranisinthecity@gmail.com. You can spell that out. I'm sure you can. You got it. I believe in you. Yeah, just like, wow. On that note, let's just dive into it, right?
right.
Okay, so I think like so you know our stories now, and like talking about our stories is easy enough because it's our stories, right? And I think now it's just like Abby and I just like the real reason that we want to have this podcast is there's just all these conversations that we want to have with you in a sense, right? So yeah, and there's one thing that we want to share with you today, and every episode we'll have something to share. Yeah, that's easy enough to understand. Okay, so I'm just gonna give my pitch. Okay, now before I give my concrete idea of what the pitch is, we never mean to criticize anyone specifically. We're not trying to
Right.
call anybody out. We're not trying to attack anybody. Please know that, right? But we do want to be honest.
Right.
We want to have an honest look at who we are as a Nazrani community, specifically kind of like in a Western culture. We want to have an honest look with each other, right? The only point of maybe our blunt honesty is towards charity, towards being able to love each other better and being able to love the Lord better, right? Like that's always the goal, the orientation of what we're doing here, right? Do you have any other?
Yeah, I mean, and I think I just on that same note of we're not generalizing in the sense of yes, assuming everyone is like this, whatever topic or group we're talking about, but at the same time we're kind of just trying to, like we talk about, like navigate through general trends that we see, right? Because that's all we can do. We look at what we see in our lives, in our own communities, and we can see, okay, that's a trend I'm seeing there. Sure. Are we going to stamp that on everyone? No.
Right.
But at the same time, those general trends show us, they lead us towards, okay, is this something we should be looking into?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just super important to realize. We're not trying to stamp any criticism on everyone and any praise on everyone, but where things need to be talked about, we hope to hit those points.
Right. These are things that Abhi and I notice when we feel it's worth it to talk about. So on that note, this is what we're noticing. Okay. And yeah, again, like I'm not calling anybody out. I noticed this particular phenomenon in parishes, in serum all of our parishes. Okay, so there is there's a gap between there's a wall between parents, kind of like the generation above us. There's a wall between parents and us. There's a generational gap, and yeah, it's just like there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding in between there, right? So, like, how do I put it? Like, where am I going with this?
I think we were just talking about how, like, well, number one, at least from my perspective, obviously every generation probably says this, but I feel like this is one of the greatest divides in generations in like overall history. I wouldn't say like but one of the greatest divides in history, because there's so many different aspects to it, right? We can go more into depth, but there's, the fact that they immigrated to America. There's the fact that, the culture has completely changed with tech and social media and all of these different things. And then there's like the age gap, right? Which is, the age gap has always been there from all of history. But those two additional things, right? The immigration, and the cultural thing that came out of like social media and tech revolution, essentially. Excuse me, but those are really two of the things that I've hit upon, and there's many more.
Yeah.
Right. So like, we're trying to see, okay, what has that led to,
right?
And how can we go about fixing that, or what are the steps we can take to the future?
Right. And I think that the particular thing that I was thinking about is that there seems to be like there's something wrong with wrong might not be the right word, but there's certainly something going on with like how the elder generation communicates with the younger generation. I'm not even talking about just like the general conversation that happens at the parish, but even like parents and children, right? And even, especially in the parish setting, to such an extent that the youth, when they grow up and they become adults, they don't come back to the Syro-Malabar Church because they're very conscious of the older generation. And that's a sad reality.
Yeah.
Sad reality.
And even among that, there's layers, right? There's the people that completely lose their faith because of that experience. And then, fortunately, there's people that at least are still participating in their faith but can't stand Syro-Malabar because of this context that we're talking about, right? But I mean, both of those, it's the same problem. It's just some people react differently. So
yeah, and I just think about how like what do people say? People say that they're afraid of being judged at the parishes. That's why they don't come back. They're afraid of like there's anxiety when everybody's like just asking bombings like so many questions at them, like what are you doing? When are you getting married? This. And that's tough. At the same time, there could be strains of like gossip, in there. But I also want to believe that there are parents and adults who like really like have the best of intentions.
Yeah.
But they don't know how to. This is something that I noticed. They don't know how to express that.
Straight up, parents ask me this all the time. So it's not even just like we're sure like they have those intentions. Yes, there's that side, but nowadays especially, there's a lot of parents that straight up recognize their own weakness there because like they don't know how to communicate to the younger generation, and I think that goes to show like it really is from like ignorance and experience. I feel like I mean,
what do you mean by ignorance?
Like simply just not knowing like what is it that these younger people respond to, and what is it that's different than the way I was brought up, right? So like in the sense that there may be certain things that are not like wrong on their own, right? So for example, what you brought up with like asking what you're doing. That statement in itself, if you look on the surface level, there's nothing harmful about it, right? Yeah. Like it's what people ask each other. But we know the tension that brings to the younger generation. And I think it's important for us to ask like why and how do we communicate that to parents? Because obviously there's a block there, right? It's not like every parent is just like, let me just go make this kid anxious real quick.
Right.
And like oftentimes it's genuinely just wanting to know how they're doing. And one way of asking that is like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And so I think that I guess that's what I mean by ignorance is there's simply a lack of understanding of like, what am I supposed to ask and why?
And I think we've been kind of circling around it. The word of the day is affectivity.
Yeah.
It is Abi and I do not claim to be full-blown experts on affectivity, but it's kind of like a topic that it's like a topic of philosophy and even like psychology too. And it's something that we kind of talk about and we notice. I think the simple definition of affectivity is your ability to experience the feelings and the emotions of the heart, but also like communicating that in a proper way.
Right.
So like there is like a correlation between like how you express it and how like what's inside and how you express it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just gathering my thoughts here. Because like one thing is a particular example is this. A question that I'm asking is like, do parents know how to communicate their interior life to their children, right? Like how do parents like in our Kerala culture, Syro-Malabar context, like how do they express their love towards their kids? Because I don't think a lot of parents just straight up say, "Morning, I love you."
Yeah.
Right. I think
there isn't even like a direct proper Malayalam translation for it, right?
Right. And we've been talking about like how like even if you wanted to express gratitude, like how do you do that?
Yeah.
In Malayalam.
Yeah, because nobody says nanni like when somebody does something, right?
Right.
Like even if that's the formal word, I guess.
And it's really interesting because like I try to be very intentional about showing my own gratefulness to like adults, like adults who are from Kerala and everything. Like I've been trying to just do that, like in general, right? So like, and I'm kind of an expressive person. Like I really like pour my heart out, you know, and then to no fault of their own, they don't know how to receive that.
Okay, money.
Yeah, they'll just say, oh, okay, and then they just kind of brush it off. And
Yeah.
like to some extent, like I guess it kind of hurts on my part because I'm like, oh, they didn't receive it.
Right.
Like
yeah.
my intentions didn't go through. But at the same time, this is why we're having this conversation. Like they just don't know how to do that,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't know why they don't know how to do that, but there's something there.
Yeah, and it could also be like this unspoken language that we just haven't adapted to, right?
Right. So it's not me saying that like it's all on the parents,
yeah.
right? But like it's something that us as like the younger generation, something that we have to be conscious of.
Yeah.
When we communicate with the elder generation, right? And it's something that I think about. It's just like how much of all of this that we've just talked about, like how much of all this is just simply a misunderstanding, right? Like how much of this is, I mean, to call it out for what it is, how much of it is just like simply pride, or just like not knowing how to like properly love the other, right? In a way that is honest.
Yeah.
Because in terms of like my own affective formation, like my education in this area, right? Like I credit my dad a lot because my dad would get in high school and stuff, like we would get into like these fights and these bickering and whatnot, and these misunderstandings that sometimes it's just straight up like language.
Yeah.
Like my inability to like express myself correctly, and then his inability to express himself correctly. But anytime that happened, anytime we got into a fight, afterwards, he would always come and apologize to me. And that I still remember that very clearly. And I know he does this with my other siblings too. Like he's always had this ability to let down his walls. If there was pride in that mix, he always was able to lay that down. And whatever misunderstanding was, it never got in the way of him expressing his love towards me. He was always able to say, like, Josh, like, I'm sorry for getting angry.
Yeah.
And that really spoke to me, and it spoke volumes to me about, and I think this is kind of the resolve to the situation, about vulnerability, about just really being able to speak to the other person, to express yourself. Yeah, that's been huge. I mean, I know that you kind of have like a similar experience.
Yeah, I think same thing with my parents, especially my dad. I think the humility aspect of it is definitely something that like puts me to shame at certain times. Of like, you know, my parents clearly were not in the wrong here, and I still don't want to apologize. I kind of just expect them to know it. But then on the flip side, when the situation's flipped, I expect them to apologize, and way more than an apology. And that's something, even as I think about it right now, it's like, yeah, maybe we have those double standards a lot of the times too, that we need to kind of put in check, I guess, in a certain sense.
Right. Like we have to. It's always in a spirit of pride that we create this mindset that it's all on them. Like it's not. There's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah, and there's certain sides that definitely do need to be worked on, and that's what we're talking about, right? Like for example, one thing I've noticed with a lot of parents in our community, and again, this is one of those things where you only see it hindsight 2020 almost, right? Because it's hard to see in the moment that this is what's happening. But one point I was really thinking about was, as a parent, how much negativity are you bringing to your kids, and how much affirmative affectivity are you bringing, right? So how many times a day, how many times a week, how many times a month are you criticizing their grades, their look, their organization, their sleeping habits, whatever it may be? And how many times are you saying, hey, like, you look nice today, or, good job on that test? some stuff like that, where I think that's where I find the hypocrisy a lot of the times, right? That really needs to be called out. Is on one side, a lot of the time parents in our community will say, look, we just don't express the I love yous and the positive things because that should go without saying. Like, our kids should know that, right? And like, do you question our love? And I think for me, the answer is no. Like, it's not that. But there is a sort of mental and more like an internal wound that can form with many people if all that's being told to them, for at least majority, is negative things. And that's not at least counterbalanced with affirmation. And that goes back, that's a hypocrisy to me. So it's not that you don't want to express yourself. It's not that, because the negative things, trust me, your kid knows too, right? Like, the younger generation, they know when they've messed up most of the time. They know when they didn't do as well as they should have on a test. They know when they should be doing something else with their life, whatever it is, right? Whatever aspect of life. And most of the time, the parent probably knows that too. Like, your kid knows, but you just want to make it a point to call them out, right? And I think a lot of the times that is where the divide comes in. I think that's where a lot of people in the younger generation get tired of it. So it's not so much of yes, there is definitely we need to understand each other more, but there's also that side of it's that double standard, I think, that gets people without even thinking about it. Like, I'm not saying all the younger generation is actively thinking, oh, there's this double standard. Some people are. But for a lot of people, it just forms like an internal wound that they never address. Because they just think to themselves, it goes, I don't know if I'd push it to the extent of like the formal definition of like gaslighting or whatever, but essentially they go into this thing of like, yes, my parents love me. And they say all this like bad stuff about me all the time. Hence, there must be actually something wrong with me.
Yeah. Where they start to really internalize that.
Yeah, and I've seen this with like so many people that they see their parents and the uncles and aunties that they know do care for them. It's not like these are people with malicious intent. Yet all the negative things that are constantly said about them, or like just kind of subtle things that aren't necessarily negative. For example, how are you doing? And then if you say something that wasn't the answer they wanted, okay. Something like that. Like, that communicates something that I'm not sure if they know they're communicating.
And what I'm thinking about is like how I wonder, if there's a parent who really wants tell their kid I love you, I love you with all my heart, but they can't. There's something that blocks them. Something in their affective ability, their formation there, that prevents them from being able to say that.
Yeah.
And the ramifications of that, is that in order for, how do I say this? The ramifications of the the children feel the need to keep doing things to gain love.
Yeah.
Because what do we affirm? We affirm grades. We affirm jobs, or high-paying jobs, rather. We affirm the fact that you're getting married. Unless you're doing these things, that am I good enough? Am I doing well? I'll be straight up. I constantly need affirmation.
Yeah.
I need to.
I think we all do. I mean, I definitely do.
Yeah. I think that's just part of what it means to be human.
Right.
It's not enough to say that I love you. You need to show it. I need to hear it. Right.
Yeah.
And this is a serious wound in our culture.
Yeah, we were talking about this before, how it has probably just trickled down through the generations.
Right.
Right. Of
from Kerala
to
here.
Yeah, this just wasn't, I mean, and we see it in cultural memes and movies and whatever, right? That's not really a thing. To actively show parental love in words, in gestures, and things like that.
And external expressions.
Right. I remember there's the subtle Malu traits or subtle query traits page or something on Facebook, and I saw this meme of like how your mom apologizes to you after a fight, and it was like a bowl of fruit or something like that. And I just thought it was super funny because that's literally exactly what my mom does and what many parents do. And it's like, you would do all the effort for a bowl of fruit, but you can't just say sorry or something.
And that's what I'm saying. They can't.
They can't.
want,
Exactly.
They want to.
That's
They
your
want
thing,
to.
right?
I'm sure
Like,
they want to.
And that's what the bowl of fruit is saying. Right?
Yeah,
If they could, they would write it out with the fruit.
Right. That's right. That's right.
But I think for them, there's that inability because, like, again, that's not something they probably experienced. They were probably also given the same form, right? And I think that's one thing. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of criticisms we have for like Western culture, but I honestly think that's one thing that is really good about Western culture, is that I do think there's a spirit of affirmation. I do think there's a spirit of really showing that you appreciate people. We do use the word thanks all the time, sometimes overuse it, right?
Right.
We
right.
do, like, I experience this with a lot of like my non-Indian American friends, of like going to their house and again, like secular friends, not Catholics or anything like that. And I would see the way they would interact with their family, especially their parents, and the way their parents would interact with them. And frankly, in my younger days, I was really jealous of it. I was like,
Dang.
man, like, she just, like, as soon as he came home, just like hugged him and like kissed him on the cheek, and went and they started having a small conversation about how their day was. And then we hung out. But it's almost as if, like, my friends, they knew what they were going to get from their parents. So they weren't like, Mom, Dad, stop. Like, let me go hang out with my friends. There was that sort of like reciprocal spirit of affirmation and affectivity. And quite honestly, that is something that's lacking in our community. Again, there's always exceptions, but that is something that's lacking. And I think something that, okay, we can look at the Western culture, we tend to criticize sometimes and be like, hey, maybe that's something we can learn from, right? Those little signs, those little acts do make a difference, especially in the long run, right? There's a huge difference between a kid that was hugged every day 20 years down the line and a kid that was never hugged a day in his life. And I think we see the fruits of that in our community. We see the fruits. You can clearly look at like some of the people in your community and be like, I mean, we have like the stereotypical phrase of like, boy, who hurt you, or something like that. But it's like, honestly, there's some truth to that, of like, there's so many wounds that come from like a lack of affirmation, this lack of affectivity that's present within the family structure. Right? And we tend to, what are the consequences of that? We tend to go look for it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, and it doesn't always jump to the extreme thing of like, oh yeah, we become drug addicts. Sure. Some people might, but for a lot of people, it's like a lifelong subtle wound that affects every decision they make henceforward.
And the other thing is that like it's like the cherry on top is that you everybody knows this.
Yeah.
Everybody knows exactly what we're talking about, but you can't talk about it.
Oh yeah.
This is an extremely uncomfortable conversation to have for like whatever reason, like why we're lacking in this as a community.
Yeah.
But this is we're just gonna look past it, like we're fine. But we're not, like it's like that meme where like the dog's sitting in the chair and the whole house is on fire. Like,
yeah.
He's like, I'm fine, but we're not. We're not. And I think like, up until this point, like we're kind of just talking about like the psychological wounds and everything, but this seriously has serious ramifications on your own spiritual life.
Absolutely.
Because part of what, like, how do you say this? Like our religion, Catholicism, it's incarnate. You need to like see it. You need to feel it. You need to hear it.
It's a great way of putting it.
Right? Like if you don't hear "I love you" from your father, your parents, your friends, anybody, how in the world are you supposed to comprehend that God loves you?
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah. I mean, like, Siraj and I were talking about this in the car. Like, like it's a vice versa thing. Like, if you can't be vulnerable with each other,
yeah,
because there's a good amount of vulnerability that you need to be able to admit your love for another person, to admit your honesty with another person. If you can't be vulnerable with each other, you can't be vulnerable with the Lord.
Yeah.
And if you can't be vulnerable with the Lord, you can't be vulnerable with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think it plays, yeah, like you were saying, it plays hand in hand, right? It really affects every aspect. So, like for example, like we were just saying with parents, and I think, for example, this whole idea of like I can't hear God, or like I don't hear him, he's not talking to me, or like, you know, I read in scripture that he loves me, but like what does that even mean? I've never felt that. Like some of these crazy like Jesus freak people that have like
right.
had this super enlightened experience and like God loves me and stuff. Why can't I have that? Right? And I think we all think about that at some point. But again, like you said, how are you supposed to know what being loved by God the Father means if you don't know what fatherly love here? Like, it's really hard. It's not impossible, but it's definitely makes it a lot harder because that's like the whole point, right? That's what fathers and mothers on this earth are for. They're reflections,
Of the Father.
right?
Yeah.
And I think if that reflection is corrupt, then the whole thing may, like, we have a corrupt view of that.
I remember my own story, and I know, I mean, this is something that we all just kind of go through, you know, like I'm trying to hear the voice of God, but I keep hearing, Josh, you need to do better. Josh, you need to get your grades up. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. You need to like keep accomplishing things, you know?
Yeah.
But whereas like the actual voice of the Father is like, Josh, you don't need to do a damn thing. Like you're okay.
Yeah.
I love you for who you are. And I cannot stress enough like how extremely blessed that my father is actually he is a reflection of the Father.
Mhm.
And I think I know you could say that
Yeah.
the same for your dad, and that's I never want to take that for granted. Like I know who the Father is because my dad is a reflection of that. And I think it's good to recognize that my dad knows who the Father is too.
Oh yeah. I think
that's
that's
a
super.
huge part of it.
Again, yeah. So that's the thing, right? It goes from generation to generation. Whatever wounds are there and whatever good is there
Yeah.
tends to kind of trickle down. And I think within our church community in particular, like he's like you said, this sort of culture of like this is not really talked about almost. And I think a certain part of it is because, like we talked about in the beginning, we never want this to come across as this blatant shutdown of our parents and like the older generation, right?
No.
But I think that's the fear of many people, and I think that's how some parents take it when this is brought up of like, do you not appreciate me?
Right.
Do you not appreciate what I've done for you? Do you not appreciate, like, do you not know that I love you? And all of these things, right? But again, to be clear, that's not what we're saying.
No.
Right? And I think that without first addressing that like that's not what we're talking about. We know, okay, let's start from that baseline that like, look, we know for the most part, like our parents do love us. Our parents, like the older generation does love the younger generation, uncles and aunties, parents, everyone, right? And when whatever you do, the questions, the advice, and all of these things that tend to maybe stress out the younger generation, we know it is coming for the most part, again, from love. But I think what needs to be talked about and understood is maybe that communication of love, there's a gap in the communication.
I feel like a lot of it's just a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Like you just don't know where I'm coming from, and I just don't know where you're coming from.
Yeah. And that goes into like on the kids side, like or younger generation. I keep saying kids, but yeah, there's like young adults in this field too, right? Of like what on our side do you feel like is a communication error? We've talked a little bit about parents.
Dang. I actually didn't think about that too much. Well, I think like one thing is that rarely like I had to be. I know at one point, I think it was late in high school, I had to be intentional about thinking about like what are my parents actually doing for me?
Mm-hmm.
Like I had to take the time to learn how my parents love me.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't just like assume, and then like you have to like like when it comes to like being grateful, that takes work.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not just an experience that just happens. Like you have to notice certain things. You have to take the time to think about these things. And I did that.
Yeah.
My dad's a little bit more expressive in his love. Yeah, I even think about like my mom. Like I was talking about this with you guys earlier. My mom, it's like Inception. I just name a dish that I'm craving, and 2 weeks later, it'll just show up on the table. And that I know that's a particular way my mom concretely expresses her love for me and my siblings.
Yeah.
But I didn't recognize that until I intentionally tried to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times, like our younger generation, like us, like we just don't take the time to think about, like, dang, like what are my parents doing for me?
Yeah.
Like rather than asking, like, what are my parents not doing for me? Like what are they doing for me? Like,
Yeah.
how can I be grateful for my parents?
Yeah. I think on my side, it's also like understanding even when they're in error, and I can see that from my perspective, or like from a younger perspective, whatever it is. Like even if they're like objectively wrong in a certain scenario, I've been trying to look at it like really, yeah, the classic like put yourself in their shoes type thing, right?
Yeah.
And I've been really trying to do that, and like 90% of the time, that kind of internally gives me peace, in the sense that it allows me to show a little more mercy to them in their decision making. Because I think about, like, so I'm in America, I'm raised in America, and this is where I'm growing up. So I understand some things about the culture that my parents may not. Right. And certain decisions they make are from a context, again, because they may not know certain things. But nonetheless, those decisions truly are in love, and at least in intention for our best, right? But I think about, let's say hypothetically, I don't know, I immigrated to like England or something, right? So it's still like, even that is not a fair example, because that's still
you
like
went back to Kerala, dude.
Yeah,
Like,
straight up. Let's just say like I went back to Kerala, right? And I started raising kids there. Like I would literally have no idea what to do with them. Like
I'm just thinking how I don't know a lick of Malayalam. Like
Yeah.
I can understand some stuff, but like that would just not.
And like some new technology came out that kids can like talk in holograms or something. I don't know, man.
Right.
Just something crazy, because cell phones and Instagram and stuff, that's like holograms to us. Like that's what it was for our parents. They could not even conceive the idea of something like Instagram years ago.
Straight up. So
I that, like, when I think about that aspect of it, it really trips me out, because I'm like, oh my goodness. Even in this context, thinking about parenting, like when I think about the future, I know there will be so many lackings as a father, and I know God will take care of me, and I know He'll allow me to be a good father. But at the same time, I know there will be so many times that I'll mess up simply because I have like no idea what they're going through. And I think initially that was like a fear of mine, that it was like, I'm terrified of not knowing what my kids are going through. But it's also like a reality that needs to be appreciated, in the sense of like, I think sometimes we maybe expect too much of our parents. And like, at least I did. And I know like other people that have talked to me about this, of maybe not that we need to lower our expectations, but maybe there are some expectations we need to modify. Of like, as much as we may express certain things. First of all, that's let me get back to that. That's one thing. How much do we express ourselves? I know, I get it. Like, yeah, sometimes there isn't an atmosphere to express yourself, and that is super important, right? And that's on the parent side, like we were talking about. But on the kid side itself, younger people's side, how much do we express ourselves? Because our parents aren't mind readers.
Yeah.
Right. So how much can we actually express ourselves? How do we talk about the pains that we have? How do we talk about the little subtle things that are probably making us anxious for the day? How do we explain to them, look, I care about school, but please don't yell at me for like this one test? Or like how do we actually express those things? And once we start doing that, okay, then maybe there can be, like I said, a modified expectation of what do our parents get about us. And then, okay, moving past that, okay, maybe you've expressed yourself. But also within that, you probably don't. Some people have the blessing of this relationship with their parents, but I feel like for the most part, you're not going to express yourself as much to your parents as you will to like your best friend.
Yeah.
Or just like a close friend in general, right?
That's okay. Yeah.
And that's normal.
Yeah.
But from that, you have to modify your expectations.
Right.
You know that like your friend and even your best friend doesn't know you as well as you hope to be known, in a sense. You hope to be understood. So like how can you expect that fully from your parents if they don't know half as much about you?
Right. I get that. Yeah.
And those certain contexts matter, right? And I think for me that was a huge thing. Just like, let me just take like a concrete example. For me, something like dropping out of college, right? And it's a huge blessing that this isn't something that I really like am tensed about all the time. But I don't expect my parents to really ever understand that fully. Why? Because there are certain things that went into that decision that I just couldn't explain to them. And there are certain things that went into that decision and continue to go into this decision of like, even if I tried to express it, like they wouldn't be able to get it from just where I'm at in my life and where they're at in their life. Mm-hmm. So there's no point in me sitting back and being like, why don't they understand? Because frankly, I look at myself from the information that they have. So I look at myself, I put myself in the position of my parents, and I go, what do I know about Ubby? What do I know about the decision he's making, the decisions he's making? And I go, oh, damn, like, I look crazy. Like, I don't know if I would let my kid do this. I hope to God I would, because I know my perspective. But at the same time, just objectively looking at it, I'm like, wow, man, I am one crazy kid. And I think from that angle, it does bring a lot of peace. So that's something I don't know. I guess I just encourage everyone to try. Is like not just superficially putting yourself in their shoes and being like, oh, what would I do as a dad? But like, what would you do as them? Like from who they are and from what you know that they know, and how they were brought up and whatever, and all of these different things. What is the decision you would be making in this place? How would you react?
I feel like your proposition for a resolve is the humility on both the child, our generation, and the generation above. The parent has to admit there are some things I am just not going to understand about my kid, but that's okay.
Oh yeah,
and
that's huge. That's huge.
And vice versa. The child, we have to understand. We have to admit to ourselves, and if possible to them, like there are just some things I am just not going to get. But that's okay, because none of these things would get in the way of what it really means to love them, right? And that's simply willing the good of the other. Yeah,
and these aren't like we were talking about rim sort of in the last episode, right? Like none of these things we're talking about in like these shouldn't be affected because they have nothing to do with the identity of the person, right? The only identity that should matter is like that's your father, that's your mother, this is your son, this is your daughter. And I think that doesn't mean, oh, let your son and daughter do anything, or like don't hold your parents accountable to anything. The complete opposite, in the sense like you said, how are you loving them and how are you showing that love? That is not dependent on whatever decisions, right or wrong, are being made. And like how to communicate that is the tricky part, right?
And I think I don't even like, I'm not even going to pretend that I have an answer to that. But I don't
think we do.
The part of the answer is and straight up, like the part of the answer is the courage to be vulnerable. We, as difficult and if we're going to be totally honest, as awkward as that conversation might look, we have to try. Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, what do we have to lose as both generations, right?
Honestly. We've seen the consequences. We've seen some of our friends leave the church. We've seen ourselves in a wounded place because of this. And I think unless we start communicating that instead of just being like, wait till I get out of the house, don't have to deal with this anymore.
Right.
First of all, we all know that's not true. You got to deal with it till the day you die. But
it's always going to be there.
Yeah. And I think that's, I guess that, yeah, like you said, I think we don't have a full answer to this because it's something, like we said, we're navigating through. But at the same time, that is something we would strongly encourage, is take a moment to think about, like, where are my parents coming from and how can I have this conversation with them?
Mm.
How can I explain to them in a way, like, prayerfully discern this? How can I explain to them in a way that doesn't seem unappreciative that, look, like, I do need affirmation. I understand why you ask me to do certain things. I understand why you expect certain things of me. Communicate that. Don't just expect that they know it the same way they expect we know certain things. Right? Really communicate with them, like, look, mom, dad, I really don't like when you say this about me. I really don't like when you tell me to, I don't know, whatever it is, like, oh, I'm lazy for not making my bed in the morning every day or something like that, right? Like these little things that add up. And I think just communicate that. Obviously don't be out of nowhere be like, mom, stop telling me to make my bed. That's not going to work.
Right.
But in the context of a full conversation of, like, why does something as little as that cause me pain?
Mm.
Communicate that. And again, make sure you're communicating, you understand to the best of your ability where they're coming from first. That you understand why they're doing this. That you understand some of the things they may not know. And you understand, yeah, look, you need to be straight up. This is one thing that I had to do with my dad at some point because, again, out of love, he really does want to understand me and the decisions I make. And he really wants to understand me, right? So going back to the whole identity thing, he really does care about my identity, not just like what I do. He wants to know Abby, and I really appreciate that. But at the same time, I think sometimes I have to step back and be like you said, Dad, you're not going to understand everything about me, and there are certain things that in the context of a father-son, parent-child relationship, I can't really share with you.
Mm.
In a way that would be prudent, in a way that would be good for either of us.
Right.
And the consequence of that is you may not understand certain actions I make that internally are because of that previous thing, whatever it is. But you need to communicate at least that concept. Like that, look, I'm not going to understand certain things about you because I may not know. You're not going to understand certain things about me. But the like one kind of asterisk I would put on that is don't abuse that.
Yeah.
You should really carefully discern what things you can and should share with your parents and what things, if there's a conflict, like what are you holding back? And is that really something you should be holding back? Or are you just saying this whole thing of I can't share it as an excuse?
Like all of this has to be in the context of wanting to be reconciled with your parents.
Yeah, honest vulnerability, like you said, right? Of like this can't be. Otherwise, it goes into this endless cycle again of I feel a certain way. I'm going to put that on my parents and expect something out of them, and vice versa. So, especially in the context of community, also do this, I think, with uncles and aunties. Like, I think there's a sort of thing, at least I was always told by my parents, and I see this with other people too, of like, oh, don't go questioning uncle and auntie. Don't go, challenging them on anything they say. Just, just get it, just hear it and go, right? Like, you don't need to say anything back. But I disagree. I think in a spirit of love and charity, say, like, understand where they're coming from. Express that first, and then go into your side of it. That is so critical, and it's a formula that's worked miracles over the past couple of years for me in communicating certain things.
Nice.
Like even with like my friends' parents. Like, for example, like Suraj's parents. When we first met, there's probably an image they had of me, and reasonably so, right? Like, who is this college dropout kid hanging out with my son? He's gonna like get him to do something too, right? And like, but how did that change? Like, now I'm pretty close with his parents. Like, I love going over, and they like having me over. And it's not just, oh, they like having a kid over. There's a respect there.
They really
And-
do want to understand.
Right.
Yeah.
And why is that, right? And not to like credit myself, but it's because I use this formula that I'm talking about. It's like whatever criticism they gave me, I didn't jump to conclusions and be like, oh, I don't want to come over anymore. So I just like, we'll just hang out somewhere else. Or I didn't go like, why do your parents do that? Or let's go to another room. I sat down and I talked with them. I explained to him, look, no, that actually makes sense. What you're saying makes sense from the context of what you're saying it. But here, let me explain that like the context is actually different. That's why. Like you're right about this, but let me explain why this is actually makes sense even with your mindset. A lot of the times that's true. It's just a matter of understanding the context. And if you can explain those certain things immediately, even if the disagreement is still there, the parents see this is actually coming from a place of reason, not just like child passion or whatever, right? It's like, because that's oftentimes what it is. It's like the conversation is avoided because like, oh, I'm angry, emotional, right? That's like a very popular line. Angry, emotional. They're gonna get too emotional, and on both sides, you're like, oh, like my parents will just start yelling. My parents will just take it this way. And then from the parent side, oh, my kid's just going to start crying, or my kid's just going to get angry with me and not talk to me for a while. But like that's because the communication that's happening is not really going with the proper order of things. You need to first express, this is really in any human relationship, but I think especially in the generational gap, first express that you understand where that side is coming from. And then you can kind of go into expressing your side. Whereas I think the formula right now that we're using as a community is there's a claim being made. Let me jump to assert my side.
Let me defend myself.
Yeah. And a lot of it comes from insecurity, right? It's like if somebody says something about, let's say me, as somebody that dropped out of college. If an uncle comes up to me and says like, how are you going to make money? Like, how are you going to provide for your family? I could jump back, clap back, and with whatever response, right? And be like, oh, all you care about is money. Or I can, whatever like BS response that I can come up with on the spot and just get mad. And maybe it would even like not be objectively wrong. Like, sure, like maybe sometimes there is a little too much care about money. Right? So would I be wrong in saying that? Maybe not necessarily. But in that context, is that really going to do any good? And the honest answer is no. So I have to step back and be like, oh, uncle, you're right. Like taking care of your family is super, super important. Right? Having the means to do that is super important. And so you're expressing, look, I do care about this side. That is important. Providing for your family. Okay. Then I can express how I think I'm going to do that. Uncle, do you have any do you have any feedback on that? You can whatever my plans are, express that. And then there's this back and forth thing that I could leave the conversation and the uncle could still think, and this happens, the uncle could still think it's a terrible decision. But at least there's that spirit of like, oh, okay, he has an idea of what he's doing. Like, I'm not going to go criticize him more. And there's a relationship that's formed.
At least there's some understanding.
Yeah.
Right? And I think, first of all, thanks for going off. That was beautiful.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. By all means, man, that's what we're here to do. One thing that I'm thinking about, like as you were talking, I'm developing this idea, like in this context, because I always like we're only one human being, and all these things play into each other, and I'm always concerned about like how this plays into our spiritual lives, and I think part of in addition to like your practical things about how to come to a resolve, the other part of it is just like we all have to look to the Heavenly Father, like parent and child, and realize we are all sons and daughters, right? Like part of the notion I almost want to say like we children, we have to say to ourselves like my parents aren't God, like they're like,
oh yeah,
like they're not perfect, but there is someone who does see me, who does love me for who I am, like existentially, like down to my core, like I am loved, and like both parent and child have to recognize that, in order for that
spirit of humility to flow through, in order for that courage to be vulnerable to flow through. Like
Yeah.
a lot of it's going to involve some serious prayer, and like there's a lot of reconfiguration that's happening.
Yeah.
That will happen in all of that.
Sorry, just to jump in on like the note you're talking about, like connecting to learning from God the Father, right? I have always wondered, because we have this idea that like God doesn't waste words, right? So what he says with intention. And I think like in Scripture we see whenever God is talking about Jesus and for example the baptism, he said, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased."
Even Jesus received affirmation.
Even Jesus received affirmation, and in a pretty intense way, right? And I think the heavens opened up for him, man. That's way bigger than a hug.
Yeah.
But I think like those simple words have such a profound, like I think there's such a profound sign into what our relationship should be, right? And into like, why is that important? If as a father or mother you find yourself asking that question, I think go back to that. Like, why do you think God found it important to say that about his Son, who already knew that, who wasn't unappreciative of the Father? We know that. So maybe it's that same aspect, right? When it comes to relationship between parent-child, asking that question of like, why did God the Father find affectivity so important?
Yeah. Jesus feels things deeply.
Yeah.
He wept, right? Shortest
Yeah.
verse in the gospel. But yeah, man, I think like maybe just to like wrap all this up, right? Like as one community, we all have to look up to the Father and recognize that he loves us individually.
Mm-hmm.
And he loves us as a whole, right? And that's what it means to be a church. Yeah, that's, man, I don't even know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, I just think to tie it all up, because we did kind of go loop-de-doop, and then I went on a little rant there.
No, we're good,
But
we're good.
yeah, I mean, I think asking ourselves, and I hope this is the kind of theme of every podcast or whatever we do, it's that it's not just a spirit of complaining and ranting about the situation, but we do try and at least offer moves forward.
Yeah.
And like Josh and I talked about, number one, look to God the Father. Look for that individual identity, the affirmation that comes from the Father, because you're not going to get that anywhere else. Yeah. And you shouldn't even expect it anywhere else. And I think that's the first step. Second step, really concretely, honestly, and in a vulnerable way, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Third thing, communicate that. Communicate that you understand to the best of your ability where they're coming from. Communicate where you're coming from, and communicate why those two things oftentimes are not that contradictory. And if they are, that's okay. Why that's okay. Why there will be certain things that may not be understood. And creating an atmosphere where that's okay. And that's all I'd encourage, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what else to say. Honestly, to anybody who's listened to this, the Heavenly Father loves you deeply. And you don't need anyone else to give you that. God the Father will show you. You know, one of my favorite prayers of all time, and I use this. It's, God, tell me you love me until I believe you. Shout outs to Matt Fred, to be honest. Yeah, he gave me that prayer. But yeah, Father, tell me you love me until I believe you. And I'm very happy and blessed to say that I do believe it now. And I pray. Abhi and I definitely, we will be praying for you. We pray for our Sir Melvar community in America and all the other eparchies in Kerala. All of this is just pointing towards communion with each other and communion with the Holy Trinity. So on that note, praise be Jesus Christ.
Now and forever.
Amen.
Amen.